You've been wrestling with some seriously big questions, haven't you? Like, what's the meaning of life? What's the nature of the universe? And how's it all connected?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, and you sent in some pretty mind-bending stuff to help us unpack it all. There's that philosophical text with, like, a chicken and a butcher analogy to explain some pretty heavy concepts.
Ah, yes.
And then there's that video about different scientific theories of consciousness, plus some of your own personal reflections, too. Looks like we're going to be diving deep into the nature of reality, the purpose of existence, and maybe even uncovering a few aha moments along the way. You ready to have your mind bent a little?
Oh, absolutely. I'm always up for a good mind bending. It's fascinating to see such a diverse range of ideas all coming together in one deep dive.
Well, you know me. Always chasing those big questions. And speaking of big questions, where better to start than with one of the OG thinkers on the topic, Aristotle?
The classic.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that even though he lived, like centuries ago, his ideas about living a good life still resonate today. What do you think Aristotle would say about how most people live their lives today, especially given all the sources you've been exploring?
Well, I think Aristotle might raise an eyebrow or two at our modern obsession with fleeting pleasures and external validation.
Yeah, he was all about that deeper stuff, wasn't he?
Exactly. Remember, he wasn't just talking about happiness, but about eudaimonia, this idea of flourishing, of reaching your full potential.
Right.
He'd probably urge us to, focus less on chasing those quick hits of dopamine and more on cultivating virtue, using reason, and, contributing to society.
You think he'd be a fan of social media?
Ooh, that's a good question. Maybe not.
That's a really interesting point, actually. He'd probably say we're mistaking the shadow for the substance.
Ooh.
Which actually brings us perfectly to Plato and his famous allegory of the cave. Remind us about that one, because this is where things start to get really tricky.
Oh, yeah. Buckle up. Imagine a group of people chained inside a cave their whole lives, facing a blank wall. The only reality they know are the shadows projected on the wall by objects passing in front of a fire behind them.
So they're basically mistaking those shadows for reality itself, right? It makes you think about all the ways WE might be doing the same thing today. What are our shadows?
Yeah. Plato called those shadows appearances, right? Yeah. And he contrasted them with the true, unchanging forms that cast them.
Okay.
So think of those forms like the perfect blueprints for everything.
Oh, okay. I see.
Like justice, beauty, even a perfect circle. These ideal concepts.
Okay.
And Plato argued that the closer we get to understanding these forms, the closer we get to, true wisdom.
Okay, so let's connect that back to our world and your search for meaning. What shadows do you think we might be mistaking for reality in our modern world? What resonated with you most from Plato's ideas?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
To, discern the true nature of things beyond the shadows.
Yeah.
It could be, the allure of social media, the endless pursuit of material wealth, or even certain ideologies that, present a distorted view of reality.
It's almost like we need to break free from those chains in the cave, right?
Right.
And that leads perfectly into something you were exploring in one of your sources, a theory so wild it sounds like straight-up science fiction.
Which one are we talking about?
The one...
The conscious universe.
Yeah, that one. The conscious universe idea.
Yeah.
And the integrated information theory. Buckle up, because this one's a doozy.
It is.
Okay, tell me everything. I'm ready to have my mind blown.
All right. So the integrated information theory, or IIT, tries to, measure consciousness based on a system's complexity and how it processes information.
Okay.
So some scientists are proposing that this theory applies not just to brains, but to the universe itself.
Whoa. Hold on.
I know, right?
You're saying the universe is like one giant brain.
It's a pretty wild concept.
I'm picturing black holes as brain cells and galaxies firing synapses. It's mind-boggling, right?
Yeah.
Think about the sheer scale of the universe. The intricate dance of particles, the constant flow of energy and information.
Yeah.
What if all that complexity points towards a form of, universal awareness?
Okay, but even if the universe processes information like a brain, does that mean it's actually aware? Does it have thoughts and feelings like we do?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, it's a question that science is still grappling with. But it certainly challenges our assumptions about what it means to be conscious and what our place is within this vast, potentially aware universe.
It's almost too much to comprehend. And that's just one of the mind-blowing ideas you've been wrestling with. I'm sensing a theme here. This constant tension between trying to find meaning and facing the possibility that it was all, predetermined.
You're picking up on something crucial. This is the age-old debate of free will versus determinism.
Right.
It's a question that's been pondered by, philosophers, theologians, scientists for centuries.
Do we truly have control over our choices and destinies? Or is everything already, set in stone?
Even that video on near-death experiences touches on this. Remember the person describing the meaning of life as, an egg?
Ah, yes. The egg theory. The idea that a single soul experiences all human lives, just in a different order each time.
It's a trip, right. But it does lean toward a more deterministic view of reality. So where do all the different philosophical schools of thought fall on this spectrum of free will versus determinism?
Well, on one end, you have the Stoics. They believe in accepting what we can't control and focusing on our responses.
Okay.
It's about, finding inner peace by aligning ourselves with the natural order of things, even if that order is predetermined. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have existentialism, which kind of throws out the whole idea of a predetermined purpose altogether.
So no fate.
Not really.
Yeah.
Existentialists believe we're entirely responsible for creating our own meaning.
So if the Stoics are about acceptance, then existentialists are about taking radical responsibility.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's a pretty stark contrast, isn't it?
It is. I'm curious, thinking about all the sources you've been digging into, where do you find yourself landing on this spectrum of free will versus determinism?
Ooh, that is a tough one. Honestly, it's a question I'm constantly grappling with myself. I find wisdom in both perspectives,
Yeah.
The Stoics teach us to accept the things we can't change, while existentialists empower us to embrace our freedom to choose.
So maybe it's about finding that delicate balance between the two.
Maybe so.
It's definitely something to ponder. And speaking of things that can shake up our sense of control and certainty, let's talk about black swans. We're just talking about black swans, those unpredictable events that can totally turn our world upside down. It's making me think about one of the sources you sent uses the example of a 2,000-pound person.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
It would be a huge E outlier, right? But it wouldn't actually shift the average weight of a group of people by that much. But then in other areas of life, like wealth or social media fame, a single outlier can have this, disproportionate impact.
That's a great point. That source was contrasting mediocrism, where things tend to average out.
Okay.
With extremistan, where those extremes have a much bigger impact.
Okay, I'm with you.
It's like the difference between, say, flipping a coin 100 times and expecting roughly 50 heads and 50 tails.
Yeah.
Versus, the unpredictable virality of a video on TikTok.
Oh, yeah.
One single video can go viral and completely skew the average number of views.
So are we saying that we're kind of living in a world where those extremes are becoming even more extreme, where those extremistan events are, more likely?
That's the idea. Think about the examples from your own research. 9/11.
Right.
The GameStop stock surge a couple of years ago. Or even, a massive solar flare. These are all black swan events that have had this disproportionate impact on our world.
It's crazy to think about.
And what's fascinating is that your sources actually suggest that technology, while often seen as this tool for prediction and control,
Right.
might actually be making us more vulnerable to black swans.
It's almost like we're becoming more interconnected, but also more fragile at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a bit unsettling, honestly, but what's the takeaway here? Should we all just be living in fear of the unknown?
Not at all. I think the lesson here isn't to live in fear, but to, cultivate resilience and adaptability.
Okay.
In a world of black swans, being prepared for the unthinkable is more valuable than, clinging to predictions.
That's a really good point. But how do we even prepare for the unknown? How do we even begin to wrap our minds around the possibility of these black swan events?
Well, one way is to be aware of our own biases,
Okay.
especially something called confirmation bias.
Ah, yes, confirmation bias.
Which is that tendency to favor information that, supports our existing beliefs,
Right.
even if it means ignoring evidence to the contrary.
It's like we build these little echo chambers for ourselves,
Yes,
surrounding ourselves with people and information that just reinforces our worldview.
Yeah.
It happens online, in our social circles. I mean, it's everywhere, really.
It is.
And it makes you think about the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Oh, yes.
That idea that, the people who are most certain about things are often the ones who know the least.
It's so true.
Yeah.
The Dunning-Kruger effect basically shows that people with low competence in a particular area often overestimate their abilities.
Yeah.
They lack the metacognition, the awareness of their own thought processes to accurately judge their skills.
And if you combine that lack of awareness with confirmation bias,
Right.
or where we're selectively filtering information to just fit our existing beliefs, it can create a pretty dangerous cocktail of ignorance and overconfidence.
Oh, yeah. It can be a recipe for disaster.
It's like those engineers in that one source, remember? They ranked themselves in the top 5% when they were actually at the bottom.
All classic Dunning-Kruger.
Makes you wonder what shadows from Plato's cave we're all mistaking for reality. But back to confirmation bias for a minute. It seems like your sources are particularly concerned about how algorithms and the whole influencer culture are amplifying these cognitive biases.
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
We're constantly bombarded with targeted information tailored to our specific interests and beliefs.
Yeah.
It creates this feedback loop where we're less and less exposed to alternative viewpoints. Like if the algorithm decides you like conspiracy theories, for example, it'll just feed you an endless stream of them, reinforcing those beliefs, whether they're actually true or not.
So what can we do about it? Should we all just ditch social media and, go live off the grid?
It's not necessarily about complete isolation, but it is about being aware of these biases and, actively seeking out diverse perspectives.
So, consciously following people we disagree with, reading articles that challenge our worldview, basically training ourselves to think critically about everything we consume online.
That's it. Your sources actually call this free thinking.
Free thinking. I like that.
It's about embracing the uncomfortable truth that, we don't know everything.
Yeah.
And being willing to change our minds when presented with new information.
Makes sense.
And it's about not being afraid to question those algorithms and influencers that are, shaping our worldview.
I like that free thinking. It's about taking ownership of our beliefs, right? And maybe that's a key part of creating meaning, too. Maybe the answer isn't about finding some, fixed objective truth out there.
Right.
But something we actively create through this process of constant exploration and open-mindedness.
That's a really powerful insight. And it brings us full circle to some of the ideas we were discussing earlier about existentialism and the responsibility of creating our own meaning.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about ancient philosophy, mind-blowing scientific theories, even some personal reflections on near-death experiences. But there's still one big elephant in the room. We haven't really talked about religion and spirituality yet. And I know that's something you've been exploring pretty deeply in your own life.
Yeah, for sure. It's such a rich tapestry of beliefs and practices.
Yeah.
And they offer such a wide range of perspectives on the, purpose of life.
Absolutely. You sent over sources ranging from, the Bhagavad Gita to the teachings of Jesus to the concept of Dharma.
It's amazing how diverse their perspectives are.
It is. And each tradition has its own unique way of approaching those big questions, right?
Right.
And even if someone doesn't subscribe to a specific religion, it seems like these spiritual explorations can still offer a sense of meaning and purpose.
Absolutely. Take that source you sent about near-death experiences.
Yeah.
Even though it's not tied to any one specific religion.
Right.
It talks about the meaning of life as a journey of, soul maturation.
Okay.
Through a series of lifetimes.
The egg theory again, right.
Exactly.
Fascinating stuff. It makes you think about reincarnation, karma, and our place in this, much larger spiritual journey.
It does. And it's interesting how so many of these spiritual traditions, whether it's Christianity, Hinduism, or Buddhism, emphasize the importance of love, compassion, and service to others as key components of a meaningful life.
There's definitely a common thread there. It's this idea that, finding meaning isn't just about personal fulfillment,
right,
but about connecting with something larger than ourselves.
Right.
And contributing to the well-being of others.
I was really struck by how these spiritual ideas overlap with the concepts we've been discussing from philosophy.
Yeah.
Like Aristotle's emphasis on living virtuously.
Right.
Or the Stoic idea of finding peace by aligning ourselves with, a natural order.
It's like there's some underlying wisdom that kind of transcends any one specific tradition or belief system.
Yeah.
And maybe that wisdom is pointing us towards this idea that meaning isn't something we find.
Right.
It's something we create.
That's a powerful way to put it. And it reinforces this idea of, embracing the journey, being open to new perspectives, and ultimately taking responsibility for the kind of life we want to live.
So as we kind of wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the biggest takeaway you want to leave our listener with? What should they be chewing on as we head into the final part of this conversation?
I think the most important thing to remember is that, The search for meaning is deeply personal. There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right. It's about finding what resonates with you, what inspires you, and what gives your life a sense of purpose. We've been on quite the journey, haven't we? Exploring this whole meaning of life thing.
We have.
From ancient philosophy to modern science, near-death experiences, that conscious universe idea. It's been a wild ride.
It has.
But I'm noticing a pattern emerging from all these different ideas. It's like they're all kind of pointing towards the same conclusion.
Ooh, I like where you're going with this. What are you thinking?
Well, it seems like the meaning of life isn't something we find out there in the universe, but something we create within ourselves.
You're spot on. Amidst all the different theories and perspectives, there really is this beautiful tapestry emerging. It's not about discovering some external truth. It's about an internal transformation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just some vague abstract concept either.
Right.
Your sources actually offer some really concrete suggestions for how we can actually create that meaning.
Oh, absolutely.
Remember that philosophical text with the chicken and the butcher?
Of course.
It argues that we create meaning through action by engaging with the world and pursuing what we find valuable.
It's about bringing those values to life.
Yeah, it even uses the analogy of a butcher preparing a chicken. There's a purpose to each step, a skill involved, and a final product that, nourishes others.
There's beauty in the process and the outcome.
It's like finding meaning in the everyday, even in something as simple as preparing a meal.
It's all about perspective, right?
Yeah, totally. And your sources also talk about cultivating virtue, pursuing knowledge, expressing ourselves creatively, finding joy in simple things.
Yes.
It's about recognizing that meaning isn't this distant goal,
Right.
but something we can experience in every moment.
Beautifully said. And one of the things that really struck me was this whole idea of embracing uncertainty.
Ooh, yeah.
In a world full of black swans, it's so tempting to cling to certainty, try to control everything.
Yeah.
But as your sources point out, it's often in those moments of uncertainty, when we're forced to step outside our comfort zones, that we discover the most meaningful experiences.
Makes me think of that Viktor Frankl quote. Man's search for meaning is the primary motivation in his life and not a secondary rationalization of instinctual drives.
Such a powerful statement.
Even in the horrors of a concentration camp, Frankl found meaning by choosing his attitude and focusing on what he could control.
His experiences led him to develop logotherapy, which emphasizes finding meaning even in suffering. It's a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah.
And, it echoes the Stoic idea of accepting what we can't control and focusing on our responses.
It's inspiring, isn't it? It makes you realize that we all have this incredible capacity for finding meaning, even in the darkest of times. It kind of reminds me of that video on near-death experiences you sent over.
Yeah.
Even though the experiences themselves were often peaceful and even blissful,
Right.
the individuals often came back with this renewed sense of purpose and a deeper appreciation for life.
It seems that facing our own mortality can be a powerful catalyst for finding meaning.
Yeah.
It brings us back to this idea that meaning isn't some external reward,
Right.
but an internal state of being. It's about finding purpose in our struggles, in our relationships, and in the simple act of living.
Another theme that keeps popping up, especially in those sources exploring spirituality, is love.
Yes.
Love. Whether it's Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, there's this emphasis on the transformative power of love.
It really makes you wonder if love is that universal language that connects us all, the force that drives us to create, to connect, to serve, and ultimately to find meaning in our lives.
I mean, that's the simplest answer of all. All you need is love.
Perhaps.
So after all this exploration, all these different sources, what final thought would you leave our listeners with?
Well, we've covered so much ground, explored so many different ideas, but I think the most important takeaway is this. The meaning of life isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's about being present, being open, and being willing to embrace the unknown. Because ultimately, the meaning of life is up to each of us to define. So go out there, explore, create, connect, and discover what makes your heart sing. Maybe along the way, you'll stumble upon your own unique answer to the question of why we're all here. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.